Welcome back. We are joined by Douglas Murray, the founder and director of a marvelous organization in the United Kingdom called the Center for Social Cohesion. And Douglas is one of the most courageous champions of freedom that I know, certainly in the British Isles at the moment, and it's wonderful to have you with us, Douglas, to tell us a bit of a war story here concerning a debate that you and the marvelous Ayaan Hirsi Ali had under the sponsorship of Intelligence Squared. First, thank you for joining us, and tell us what happened.
Well, great to be with you, Frank, as always. It was interesting. This was a debate which had been organized some time ago. The motion was Islam is a religion of peace. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the great, courageous former Dutch MP and women's rights activist now in Washington, and myself were up against two Muslims, a very nice girl called Zeba Khan, who's recently been called a Muslim leader of tomorrow or something like this, and somebody called Majid Nawaz, who is a former leader of the extremist group Hizb ut-Tahrir, was for 14 years, and for the last 3 years has said that he's turned his back on that and is trying to reform Islam. But the key thing about this debate was it wasn't about Islamism, it wasn't about any of the other nuances, it was Islam itself that we were debating.
And Hizb ut-Tahrir, just for the record, is one of the most radical and dangerous groups. We feature it prominently in our new Team B2 study entitled Sharia, the Threat to America. And it's the more interesting because we're seeing these characters adopting a different coloration. But what was your going-in expectation of this debate, and what came out of it according to the tabulations of the sponsors?
Well, what was so interesting was, I think both Ayaan and I thought, well, we were getting into the belly of the liberal New York beast, as it were. It was a debate organized at NYU, and I was fully expecting that although the audience might listen politely to the points that Ayaan and I were making, they weren't going to back them. The audience were polled before they came in, and a majority said that they believed that Islam was a religion of peace, and or were undecided, and we had only about 25% of people saying that Islam was not a religion of peace. And by the end of the debate, after a good couple of hours, 55% of the audience at NYU voted against the idea that Islam was a religion of peace. And this was a huge swing of almost all the undecideds, and indeed of many of the people who decided for the other side beforehand. And I think there's several reasons for that, which is that Ayaan and I had the opportunity not to explain how things would be in an ideal world, or how we would wish them to be, or how some people pretend them to be, but how things are, getting right to the core of the problem. We kept on expressing the fact, I think this is important, that most Muslims, of course, worldwide are not jihadis or extremists or anything like that, but that the core of the faith, the founding documents in the faith, the founder of the faith, had very, very violent things that he did, very many violent things in the Holy Books, and that although this doesn't mean by any means that Muslims have to stop being Muslims or anything like this, we have to be able to admit that, and they have to be able to admit that if we're going to get anywhere. And what was so striking was that they could not admit this. They would not, and Majid Nawaz in particular, could not, because you see, he is now suffering what all these people who make themselves self-appointed Muslim leaders suffer, which is that the more people he aims to represent in the Muslim world, the more lies he has to tell to the rest of us. And that's an extraordinary and tragic calibration to see working out.
Yes. Well, and this is very much part of the thesis that we've propounded about Sharia and what it requires of those who are engaged in promoting the worst of this faith, that is to say, the totalitarian political program. And my congratulations to you and to Ayaan for once again holding the line and helping to illuminate what's at stake here. And we look forward to talking more about that. But before we lose all of the time with you, let me just ask you about a fellow who has figured prominently of late, thanks to CNN broadcasts. Most recently, I guess, Fareed Zakaria Sharia, and before that an ABC News interview conducted by Christian Amanpour, namely a sparring partner, quite literally, I think, of yours in the UK, Anjem Choudhury. Tell us what he's up to and why it's so important that we be hearing him clearly.
Well, the interesting thing about Choudhury is he's become a darling of the UK media, and now it seems it's going to become a darling of the US media, because interesting, he pretty much says exactly what people fear most that certain Muslims are thinking. He, for instance, on the program with Christian Amanpour, a terribly organized program, a very biased program as well, it has to be said, with the wife of Imam Rauf of Ground Zero, who incidentally wouldn't debate against Ayan and me last week in New York, despite being asked weeks and weeks before. On this program of Christian Amanpour's, everyone was doing the sort of peace, love stuff. And along came Choudhury from the UK by video link, and saying, among other things, that the importance of Sharia dominating the world, and said very, very provocatively, and it was interesting to see the audience's reaction, said, we hope one day, inshallah, he said, that the flag of Islam will fly over the White House. This is something he's been saying for a long time in London, and they hope, he says, that the flag of Islam will fly over Downing Street. I think even Buckingham Palace.
Yes.
He's hoping the Queen is going to convert.
The works.
The interesting thing about this, by the way, no signs of that, just to assure your listeners.
Oh, thank goodness.
Her Majesty remains solid. But the interesting thing is that among all of the sort of nuance that a lot of people do, Choudhury remains utterly unnuanced and says something which I mean, it is interesting and important to hear. I think there has to be something he said about this, though, which is that in the UK, he in recent years been depicted as a bit of an idiot, with some justification. He runs a group recently banned again. It's always reforming and then being banned, called Al Mujahirun. They probably have. I've seen them. I was hijacked by them some time ago at a meeting. They probably have 100, 150 or so followers. What's interesting, though, is that although being a small group, they have become, in the UK, a focus for very, very angry and violent people. We reckon that 1 in 7 to 1 in 6 UK people convicted of terrorism-related offences in the last decade have been linked to his group. So I would warn Americans on this that he is a bit of a joke figure in some ways. In some ways what he does is exceedingly disturbing. But at the root of this is that even if he doesn't believe a word of it, and sometimes I have to tell you I think he doesn't, there are, however, people who follow him who do, who are dangerous and want to act on what he says.
Yes. Douglas Murray, we're going to have to leave it at that, I think. But what you've laid before us is the phenomenon of people who are, I would say, engaged in the stealth jihad, as in your debate, and certainly people who are engaged in the violent kind or the pre-violent kind, and making no bones about it. And your willingness to stand athwart them and help all of us understand the stakes here is deeply appreciated, as is your splendid organization, the Center for Social Cohesion in Britain. Thanks for joining us periodically here at Secure Freedom Radio, and we do hope you'll come back soon.
Always a pleasure.
There's a lot to talk about.